Last week we talked about audio for video, so today we're looking at correcting our footage. So color correction and color grading. Hey everyone, Stephan here. I hope you're doing well. So today we're talking about color correction and color grading. Now we cannot confuse those two things. Correcting, well, getting it right, and grading, putting our own style to the whole thing, or creating that extra mood, I guess. So really, when it comes to shooting video, I think there's three categories. There's the shooting happy. That's the parents who run around in the park taking video of their kids and film it, look at it, happy, awesome. I think that's most of the people. And if they edit something, well, they probably do it on an iPad or use some templates, and good for them. My 11-year-old told me that she knows how to edit video. Well, what she does is she uses iMovie, uses some template, throws in some terribly shot footage, and is totally happy. Good for them. So this episode is not for those. Then we have the enthusiasts. I believe that's 90% of the people. And then we have the pros. I'm not talking about professional photographers. I'm talking about film professionals or video professionals. These are the people who usually never do more than what they do because they're so good at what they do, they don't have to do everything. We enthusiasts, we shoot the footage, we edit the footage, we color grade and color correct the footage, and then we deliver the footage. The cinematographer on the high end will probably never edit his own footage. And so is the editor, will probably hardly ever be out there with a video camera in his hands. And then for the whole grading, well, there's people they're called colorists who do this amazing job of adding that flair, that nuance, or that special look to a movie. And of course, these are very, very specialized. So that's why I call them the pros. So today we're talking as enthusiasts. Now, if you know all that stuff, this is not for you. Or if you don't care about all that stuff, this is not for you. If, however, you do care and you belong in that category, well, maybe today is a little bit helpful. Now, where do we start? We have to look at what we call broadcast safe norms first. To do so, we have to jump into our editor. Now, I personally use Final Cut Pro and will show you most of what I do in Final Cut Pro. Nevertheless, I have good friends who use Premiere Pro and produce insanely cool material as well. So at the end of the day, they both do the same. One does one thing a little bit better, the other one does the other, but it's totally up to you what you want to use, or what is most comfortable for you, or what gets the job done for you the quickest and the best. So let's switch to a much, much prettier picture while we talk about those broadcast safe standards that I mentioned. You know your histograms in Lightroom, Capture One, Photoshop, so it's pretty similar. Now in Final Cut Pro, if you don't see them like I have them here, you can go into View and then switch on your video scopes. In Premiere Pro, you would go into your colorist and then click up here, and you get your scopes as well. They look slightly different, but do exactly the same thing. Back in Final Cut, let's have a look. We have 0, which is black, we have 100, which is white, and of course, all the tones in between. Now, in this case, we're looking at a waveform in Luma, as in the luminosity. Here on the left, as you can see, we have the RGB parade, which splits the Luma signal into the red, the green, and the blue channel. The Luma overall, of course, is important to stay within the standard that I said. And broadcast standard is very simple. Don't go below 0 and don't go above 100. The other important level, I set a little marker here, is 70, which is where skin tone should sit. Also to explain, this thing, this Luma thing, reads from left to right as our frame goes from left to right. So this spike here represents this white wall here. And then as you can see, it dips down. That's the darker area of the red. Now talking about skin tone, looking at the vector scope, you have this line that goes up here. That's the skin tone line. So if you're not sure about your white balance, then you can try to get the skin tone onto this line, and then you're pretty much set. Now, in Final Cut Pro, there's several ways how you can correct this. Now, in this case, this is already corrected. The original material looks like this. This is slightly off in terms of color balance, and it is shot in log. In photography, we talk about JPEGs and RAW. In video, it's a little bit different. Of course, there's cameras that shoot RAW. There are, however, usually at the higher end. So for most people, shooting RAW, even though that would be perfect, is not possible. Well, the next best thing is to shoot in log. In log, as you can see from the waveform here, the shadows are pushed up and the highlights are pushed down, which creates this washed out look because it preserves all the shadows and all the highlight details, which then allows us to correct and grade the footage a lot better than if we would have a baked-in signal. What if you can't shoot log? I know a lot of cameras do not shoot log footage onto their own memory cards, only to external recorders. Well, the next best thing is to shoot in a flat profile. So when I talk about a flat profile, in most cameras you have picture profiles which you can choose. So when you shoot your photos, of course you're going to shoot in RAW anyway, but when you switch to video, choose a profile that is as flat as it gets. It usually reduces the contrast, reduces the colors, and giving you the best option after shooting RAW or shooting log. On the left side, you see the log footage, and on the right side, you see the flat footage. And let's be honest, they look very much the same. Where the difference becomes very obvious is if you go into the extremes, the highlights or the shadows. When you look at this on the left, the log footage, on the right, the shot with a flat profile applied, and it's clear that the left side retains those highlights while the right side has blown them out. Could I have lowered the exposure on the right side? Yes, I could have, but then lose some of the shadow details. So ideally log, if not possible, shoot in flat. Looks terrible in the back of the camera, but gives you the biggest amount of possibilities in editing. The reason I'm stressing this so much, let's have a look at this footage here. This was shot with an iPhone, of course, not in log or in RAW. So it looks interesting. There's a lot of color, a lot of people walking around. Yet when you look at the sky, it is blown out. No tool in the world will recover those details. But to really bring the point home, let's jump back to our little lemon tree. Let's assume this is a pretty good exposure and we quite like the colors and everything. What happens if the light changes? Something like that. Have a look how the blacks are crushed. Or if it gets too bright, as the sun really comes out from behind the clouds, we're getting into trouble here and it's just washed out. Well, how does that look like in log? Have a look at our waveform. As it gets really dark, we still maintain all the details in the shadows. And as it gets really bright, we still maintain details in the highlights. Which brings me to the next subject, the LUTs, the LUTs, the color lookup tables. They're both used to correct an image as well as style an image. Important to know is that most LUT packs that you find on the internet are purely for styling. For color correction, you need a LUT that is specifically made for your camera and your log footage. In Final Cut Pro, there's several ways to apply a LUT. One of them would be to select the clip, then look it up in your browser, and then you go into the inspector, and under camera LUT, you would select your specific LUT. Now in this case, you will see that this is for a Nikon C6 converting N-Log to Rec 709. Rec 709 is the default standard for video submission at this moment in time. Why is that so important? The LUTs that you can buy, or the LUT packs that are all over the internet, usually apply color changes to a file already in Rec 709 color space. Our log footage is not yet in 709 until we convert it to 709. Taking any kind of LUT pack and throwing it at a log image will usually not produce those awesome results that they all show you in advertising. Having said that, looking at this doesn't look too great. So for me, this is actually not the best way to go. And instead, I will go into the effects browser, search for LUT. The one that we're looking for is called Custom LUT. So I'll throw this onto my clip. And now I have the advantage of not only applying my LUT, but I can also mix it in how much I want. About 50%, that's usually where I start. So the next thing would be to adjust the overall color tones. Now, yet again, this is not a tutorial on how to use Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro, so I will go through those rather quickly. But let's say we want to adjust this. It's a little bit on the warm side, so I would apply a color wheel adjustment. Very simple to explain. We can overall brighten or darken the entire image, or we can do this just for the highlights, just for the shadows, or just for the midtones. We can tint the overall image, and we can adjust the saturation of the overall image. And again, the same applies to the highlights, shadows, and midtones. And then we also have sliders for our temperature and the tint, exactly the same as you would expect in Adobe Lightroom or Camera Raw. So what's the best way to do it? I'll check the Luma waveforms, and I take the highlights and push them up until they nearly touch the 100. Then I'll go into the shadows and take them down until they nearly touch the bottom. That already has put me in a very good place. If I switch this off, switches on, now I get a pretty decent picture. It's still on the warm side, so I would take the color balance down a little bit until it is neutral. And now I feel it lacks a little bit of contrast. Contrast usually comes from the midtones, so I would take the midtones down a little bit and push the overall saturation up just a tiny bit. And then we have a look. That's before, that's after. This shot is pretty much corrected. Is this the way I do it? To be honest, no. I use plugins. One of my absolute favorite is Color Finale Pro. To quickly walk you through why I use this specific plugin, let's jump to this gentleman here that sits on the floor and pretends to work real hard. As you can see, quite a washed out image. Well, it is log. Once we apply Color Finale Pro, to start with, I go into color management and I can tell the plugin what kind of footage it's dealing with. Now, if I have my specific LUT for my camera, well, wonderful. But if I don't, I can tell the plugin already, hey, it is log footage. And it already does a pretty good job at applying it. However, as I have a specific LUT, I will select that. I'll go in here, select my LUT, and again, it's at 100%. I'll take this down to about 50. And that alone is already doing a lot of work for me. Looking at the waveform, however, I see that I still have a lot to play with. So instead of going through any of those settings, I'd go straight into the edit layers. I apply my color wheels here. I will push up the whites until I'm just under 100. I'll push the blacks down until they're just about to touch the 0 mark. And then I'll see what I want to do with the mid-tones. Now, as you can see in this plugin also, in video terms, we're not talking about highlights, midtones, and shadows. We're talking about gain for the whites. We're talking about gamma, as in the contrast, for the midtones. And we're talking about lift, which is the black tone. So if you see lift, gamma, and gain, just think of it as shadows, midtones, and highlights. Very often I find it helpful to take the saturation out of the black areas a little bit and boost them a little bit in the midtones. So what about the skin tones? How can we now determine where those skin tones lie? As I said before, we go into our vector scope and we can see in this case the skin tones are pretty much on the line, which means that the skin tones are fine. If they wouldn't be, apply a crop just to the skin tones, something like this. And now we can really see where that line sits. If this, however, would be quite off, we could go into our color wheels and then adjust it. And as I move this around, you can see how the white point gets away from the skin line, which in this case introduces quite a bit of green. And that's a simple way how you would correct a skin tone. Now that I know that my color balance and my skin tones are correct, I will always go back to my waveform to make sure that I stay within those levels. And to compare, this is how it was before, and that is after, all done very quickly in this plugin. And of course, it goes much further. As example, you could apply a mask to a certain area and make those adjustments only to that area and then even track it. But that goes too far for this episode. You will find a ton of tutorial on YouTube if this is a plugin that you would be interested in. Now, another plugin that I use quite often is for motion VFX that is called M-Film Look. If you look through all the presets that come with this plugin, you see that there's a lot of toning, a lot of styling going on. Remember yet again that these styles are meant to apply to footage that is already Rec 709. So let's just start from scratch. So we now have two instances. We have the first instance, which is Color Finale Pro, which I just used to get this into the ballpark. And now we refine our look or style our look with M-Film Look. Of course, you can go in and adjust your levels further, make basic adjustments like taking the saturation further out. Well, we've done all of that. You could apply some funky flares if you like, and then you could apply a further LUT. And we can just click through and see what we like, if this is what you would like to do. Yet again, we have the option to take the intensity out or apply it. Now, I like this quite a bit, so I could apply a little bit of film grain just to make it really arty-farty, and then apply a vignette, just as you would know from Lightroom or Capture One. But why is this so weird? It shows even more if you switch on the letterboxing effect. I don't see any, because this is shot in 4K and it's zoomed in to 100% so that it fills the frame in HD. Zoomed out, this is the actual frame, and now we actually see the barn doors and we see the vignette applied correctly. That's the downside of applying a pack like this to a clip if we then want to use those extra pixels that we shot in 4K and deliver in HD. And the best way to do so is with an adjustment layer. So let's do that. We go in here, we go down to where I personally have my adjustment layers. I take a simple adjustment layer, lay it over the whole top, and now I can apply my look to the adjustment layer, and voila. Now, no matter how much I zoom in, those bars will stay exactly where we had them. Beautiful. And that look that we now have applied is now applied to all those clips. And that's an easy and quick way how we can grade all our footage. Now, you will not have this if you use your standard Final Cut Pro, but you can download those. I put the link into the description. These are just the adjustment layers that I created in Apple Motion. So how do you create a grade yourself? Let's apply this adjustment layer here again, and we just use this old man here as an example. Well, there's several ways. Again, you can use the Final Cut Pro or the Premiere Pro adjustments. In this case, how about we just push the blacks a little bit into the teal kind of color, the highlights a little bit into the yellows, and then we maybe desaturate the highlights a little bit. We saturate the darker areas, take them down a little bit further, and of course we want to keep our scopes under control, what we have here. I'll leave the midtones alone. I'll take the saturation out a little bit and maybe take them down a little bit. And just with this adjustment, we get that sort of tealy kind of look that is quite liked. And now we have this look across all our images. So if we switch this off and switch this on, you just get that extra look. How much and how far you want to go with this is entirely up to you. A simple question of personal gusto. Now, talking about color grading, sometimes we also have to reverse engineer a color grade. I have several clips here. A sweet little story here, the turntable that sets down the needle. We hear the music and we imagine the piano playing, the guitar playing, the bass playing. However, when you look at this, all of those have a very different look. We have a lot of greens in the darker tones here. We have sort of a muted tone. We have a lot of warm tones. So how do we get them all look the same or work together? Well, we have to reverse engineer the color toning or the grading. Now, in this case, again, I use Color Finale, and with one click, as you can see, you will see that I've already done this correction. So this is before and this is after, and the way it looks, I lifted the shadows more towards the warm tones. The mid tones, which were very much in the green yellowish area, I pushed towards the blues, and then the highlights I took a little bit down because they had a lot of yellow in it. If you look at this before and after, well, now it's more of a neutral look. Now let's go to the piano. Well, the piano already now seems to fit, or at least fit better. But does it have those colors in it? Those warm tones? No, not really. So again, in this clip, I've applied Color Finale again. And this time I moved just the highlights a little bit towards the yellows to get those yellow tones that we have here in the highlights. And just this adjustment and a little bit of darker tones in here. And now we are talking. Then the next clip, well, this one is too warm. So let's have a look at the correction. There's a lot of blue in it, as it looks like. And that already makes it much more suiting. And the bass, well, there's not much we have to do. Lifting the shadows a little bit will just help this again to fit in with the piano. So now, if we look at this, it makes a lot more sense. Now there's big jumps still from the dark piano to the bright guitar. When you have jumps like this, it always throws you out a little bit. So what is a better option? Well, in this case, we have a lot of dark tones, but we introduce a big chunk of that orange. So if we are able, not in the middle of an interview, of course, but if we are able to structure our edit ourselves, I would move this in front of this clip. And by doing so, we're going from the turntable to our dream, the dark piano. Now we introduce a little bit more orange, and now we have a lot more orange. And now this really works together. So sometimes it's also reverse engineering. And then once we have that look or those adjustments and we feel they work together, well, feel free to now on top of that apply your own style. And of course, this doesn't just apply to DSLR footage. Here's an example with a 360 camera. And by the way, for all you flat earth lovers, well, I'm sorry. Anyway, this was also shot in log. I apply a lot and voila, beautiful. This is before, this is after, voila. And last but not least, a lovely drive through the landscape of amazing Fiji. Well, that took a little bit longer than expected, but I just wanted to show you these things, and I hope, as always, that this was a little bit helpful. Now, if you like what I do, and I know I say that every week, but hey, give it a like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, all those beautiful things. And if you have any questions, leave it in the comments below or send me a message directly. That's all good, and I look forward to hear from you. Also, if you're loose with cash and you want to help me create those weekly episodes, then you will find a link to my Patreon page in the description below as well. Every help and every support, or any support, is greatly appreciated. In any case, the best thing you can do for me, aside from all the above, of course, is to go out and create some awesome stuff. And I'd like to see it. So feel free to share your final masterpieces with me. All right, that's it for this week. I'll see you again next Friday.